Good morning, everybody. My name is Burgundy. I'm going to be going through Chapter 8 with you, Politics and the Law. Let's start with democratization and the rule of law. The goal since the Soviet era is to establish a democratic rule of law, making law enforcement separate from the will of the authorities, and making the law serve everyone, not just using it as an extension of state power for state purpose. Unfortunately, many reforms are flawed and subject to abuse and corruption by political leaders. Both Putin and Medvedev have stressed how important a rule of law is, but members of the political hierarchy and judicial institutions interpret and go above the law when it serves their purposes. A couple of phrases that keep coming up in this chapter are rule of law and rule by law. Just to give you the breakdown on the difference, rule of law is power is sufficiently dispersed among groups and organizations in society to prevent any one group from monopolizing access to the law. Whereas rule by law is a powerful elite concentrating on political power, uses the law to protect its prerogatives. Now the next few slides here, we're going to talk about the different leaders in the past, 50 years or so, and what they've done towards reformation of the law. Let's first talk about Stalin's successors, and please forgive me if I do mutilate these few names here. Gregory Malkinov, Nikita Khrushchev, Leonid Brezhnev, Yuri Andropov, Konstantin Chernyakhov were the five gentlemen that came after Stalin. In the 1950s, the secret police were put under legal control, or better legal control. Prior to this, the secret police would use the law as a way to legitimize their actions, brutality against the general society there. New laws promoted societal legality. Stalin's successors temporarily eliminated regime terror. Citizens no longer needed to fear short or no trials that sent them to labor camps. Even still, there were harsh judgments against anti-Soviet propaganda, and oftentimes people who did so were placed in mental hospitals. When that happened, these folks that were placed in the mental hospitals were generally forced mind-altering substances, actually making them crazy if they weren't already, as a form of punishment. Next we're going to talk about Gorbachev a little bit. If you'll recall, towards the beginning of the class, we discussed him and actually some of the laws that he established. But anyway, Gorbachev established law-governed states. Everyone follows the law. Ideally there's nobody above or below the law. He also established the right to own property, which is very important, both politically, economically, personally, socially. The right to own a business, like I said, economically, very important. Reduced the party control. He proposed a new executive presidential system and a new legislative element. He also brought in the first free elections since 1917, and probably one of the most important things, helped towards creating the Constitutional Court, which we will discuss a little bit later on in the presentation. During Yeltsin's administration, the courts were braver and started to get to the point where they were willing to go against the president, to actually get closer to democracy. In 1993, the Duma actually upset Yeltsin by releasing political prisoners. What was found is that the procurator ruled in favor of the Duma, It found that the state was actually in violation of human rights. Yeltsin expressed views against communism and looked to eliminate the foundations in the law. Even then, politics and people were still influenced slightly by communism. He also worked towards dissolving the KGB into smaller, smaller agencies. Putin and Medvedev. Under Putin, he suggested that Russia should be governed as a dictatorship of law. He also ensured that the procurator was re-centralized and made an ally of the Kremlin. Medvedev was in favor of constitutional democracy. He also allowed for the prosecution of the school system for misuse of funds. Both teachers and administration were prosecuted due to this misuse of funds. Problems with reform. Law actually being enforced by officials. Informal power of the president often clouds the ability of the courts to apply the law impartially. Both regional and local courts are susceptible to political influence as well. Oftentimes political leaders will practice getting involved in the daily judicial issues, calling judges and making suggestions on court rulings. Corruption in the courts and law enforcement is actually rather high in Russia. Also, variations of criminal organizations also corrupt. We'll discuss these a little bit later on in a little more detail. Law enforcement, specifically, we're going to talk about the procurator. Traditionally, the procurator carries a great deal of power, is considered one of the most prestigious branches of law enforcement in Russia. The procurator is responsible for fighting crime, fighting corruption, stopping abuse of power, investigating criminal wrongdoings, bringing cases to court and prosecution of those cases, supervision of officials and organizations to ensure observance of the law. They're kind of close to what we in the States would consider a federal prosecutor. The procurator is in charge of enforcing laws and the rules in every sphere of state and at every level of power. As of 2004, the procurator became responsible for stopping or at least curbing abuse by bureaucrats at the state level. In the 90s, however, the procurator has its own infections due to making alliances with governors in order to secure enough funds to pay their staff. When Putin created the super districts, the procurator created a new branch to serve them. The procurator was responsible for combining the laws, the regional laws that conflicted with federal laws, basically making them so that they coincided well. Despite the political influence of the procurator it's grossly underfunded. The procurator has lobbied for more resources rather than less responsibility. Procurator opposition. Basically, these are the things that the procurator opposed. It opposed giving arresting persons the right to an attorney. It opposed the adoption of the jury system. It fought against the court's right to review the prosecutor's decisions. Fought to keep supervision of criminal investigations when Putin created the new system of supervision for investigations. In 2002, reform reduced legal power and required the procurator to provide warrants for arrest, wiretapping, search and seizures. And lastly, the presidential nomination of a Proctor General. Um, Basically, they wanted to keep the power to themselves. If you look on page 225 of our text, it will give you everything in a little bit greater detail than what I've talked about. Additional law enforcement includes the KGB, which was dissolved, but pretty much was the main law enforcement for a number of years. It covered a broad spectrum of security for the USSR. Interesting fact, Putin was a member of the KGB, which again, like I said, it was dissolved in the 90s. The Ministry of Internal Affairs manages uniform police, manages security, military security, traffic cops, specialized police forces like the riot police. The Ministry of Security came out of the KGB dissolution. Main job is to guard state security in domestic matters, which was later reorganized. Foreign Intelligence Service came from the KGB dissolution, and its basic, what is the word I'm looking for? Basically, what it's there for is to cover international factions and espionage, so spy stuff. The FAPIS basically maintains the telecommunication service for the state. The FSP, which is basically your border guard or border patrol. FSNP is your tax police, which would be as close to our IRS as they come. But now the Federal Security Service, the FSB, covers the foreign intelligence activities to boost Russia's economical, scientific, technological, defense potential, and ensures the government security, and continues to expand on its duties. Judiciary. Until recently, being a judge was one of the least experienced, most underpaid positions in the legal system. Currently, there are approximately 30,000 judges to hear almost 6 million cases a year. With that workload that high, in '97, the bailiff enforcers became a part of the legal system to ensure that judgment was complied with. Recently, jury trials have been reintroduced as part of high-profile cases.